Hi, as you spend time going through your breakup and you're working on recovering from the relationship or from the breakup, we don't just want to live or just to start living, we want to learn. So it's very similar to how you learned not to touch a hot stove. So it probably didn't take too many times of touching the stove to realize, oh, every time I touch this, I get burnt, right? So when we reflect on what you've just been through, and now we start to sort of look through this information, categorize it, make little piles of it, it's going to help us to understand, oh, let me learn from this past experience so I don't keep getting burned in future relationships, or I don't keep causing burn to someone else in future relationships. Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm passionate about helping you understand what relational trauma is so you can overcome it and ultimately move on with your life. So today is using a bunch of the previous exercises that we've walked through, which I will leave a link for all of those videos above. You can go to the playlist. Also, everything comes from I Can't Believe How Much This Hurts. You can find it on Amazon.com. And I have a full course available on my website, which will also be linked. But today is all about taking the information that we've been collecting, and now we are going to put it all together so we can start to learn and get some information on ourselves, how we are in relationships, and also, okay, so this is what did not work. Let me find the bits and pieces also that did work, and how can I implement that into my next relationship? So the first thing we're going to do is look at some deal breakers. So you can take your list that will be from the video of looking at what was bad. This was a list. If you haven't done this yet, you can go back and watch that video. Or if you did the exercise, this list is the list you made that identified everything that was bad for you. How did it go bad for you? Usually it comes with some pain, some disappointment, some regret, some embarrassment, some humiliation. Any of those are very common emotions when you're looking at what was bad in a relationship. So again, this is on page 25. With looking at the deal breakers or looking for the deal breakers, you want to go to that list, what was bad, and you want to circle maybe the top 3 worst things that there is no way around those. So sometimes, it's bad for us, but when we have a conversation, when we can kind of find middle and compromise, it can stretch us. A relationship is meant to grow us, cultivate us as a person. So when we're doing those things, it can change and be different for us, but a deal breaker is not going to be different. That's something that you never want to get used to, you never want to accept, you never want to have in your life. So that's different than just something that was uncomfortable or you just didn't like for whatever reason. A deal breaker would be, this is absolutely not. There'll never be an explanation. There's never going to be a compromise. I'm ever going to be willing to have this in my life. So you want to kind of circle your top 3 or 5 deal breakers, and then you're going to get out a piece of paper or put it in your phone, on a computer, however it is you track information, and you're going to write down my deal breakers. And these are the things you're never going to accept moving forward. So this is how we're starting to learn from the information that we collected, because we could just go on and keep living and we have a really good chance of repeating it. So remember, we want to stop repeating what we don't like. We want to look at it, acknowledge it, and learn from it. And this is one way that we can do that. Okay, so we have our deal breakers. So the second thing we want to do is look for red flags. So there was a prior video on doing your timeline. So you want to go revisit your timeline and go back through and circle all of the red flags that were there. That could have been right before you met that person. Maybe it was a red flag in yourself. So we gave the example of someone who moved to a new city and she was really vulnerable. And this was the first person who really showed an interest in her, and it was really on and really quick. So because she came from a super vulnerable state, maybe that's her red flag. Maybe she's going to learn, I don't get in a relationship when I'm feeling really vulnerable or alone. I want to get solid in myself first before I go and agree to enter into a relationship. So the red flag isn't always a behavior in someone else. It could be one of your behaviors. Maybe you didn't tell anyone that you were close to what you were actually going through. So maybe next time, if you catch yourself lying about how good the relationship is, or downplaying abuse or anything that is in relation to that, that could be a red flag. But red flags could be, the person seemed really self-centered, or I caught them lying early on, or I found out they actually weren't single. So any of the red flags in those behaviors. So go through and circle some of those red flags And I would really encourage you to look at the red flags in yourself as well as the other person, because for sure it's going to exist in both arenas. And we want to make sure we're really pulling those things out, because you're still going to have yourself in every relationship you're going to go through moving forward. So it's really important to look at ourselves too. Okay, the next one, and this is found on page 26. This is where you're going to look over the what was bad list and also your timeline, and you're going to want to look for patterns. So it can be really hard to just try and see a deal breaker or just try and see a red flag. But if you can see a pattern throughout the relationship, was there a pattern and what was it? So if the relationship went south and it ended, and by the way, not every relationship ends because it was so horrific or terrible. Sometimes people just grow apart, which you could also try and learn from and see what you could do moving forward if there is anything you could do. Sometimes there's a move and it's just out of your hands. So you could still do these exercises, but it's not always going to be in the same fashion or the same avenue as someone who had a terrible relationship, but you will have similarities. So looking over that timeline and what was bad, are there any patterns you can see now? So this is where just reading through what was bad, do you see a pattern? If you look at your timeline and you read through the whole thing, do you see a pattern in that? If you can find a pattern on this other piece of paper where you've already written the deal breakers and the red flags, you're going to write down what was the pattern in this relationship. Maybe you experienced a lot of neglect. Maybe what was bad and the timeline both have neglect in common, and maybe that was the pattern. Okay, the next one, number 4, you're going to use your timeline, and this could be painful. They could all be painful. So remember, if it's ever overwhelming, take a break from the video. If it's ever too overwhelming, I would stop altogether and seek help in your area from a local professional, because this is not a substitute for therapy. Now, number 4, in looking at your timeline, was there a moment on there where you could have or maybe should have walked away? Was there like a defining moment where you're like, yep, right there. This was a moment. Maybe you have multiple. Sometimes we do. This moment, this moment, this moment. These were all moments I should have walked away. So you're going to identify a moment you should have walked away or could have walked away. In hindsight, yeah, I wish I would have walked away right then. And then you also want to write what kept you. Was it on your side of the street, like in your own thinking or your own fears, or was it what they said to you? Was it part of that cycle of abuse or that honeymoon phase that got you sucked in? Maybe they bought you flowers. Maybe they cried. Maybe they really treated you even worse, which somehow got you sucked in deeper. So just being mindful, was there a moment you could have left? If so, why did you stay? And that's not a shameful, blaming thing. Remember, we're just trying to take the information so we can actually learn and stop getting burnt in the future. Okay, and the last one, you're going to use your timeline and you want to identify what was the beginning, what was the middle, and how did it end? What was the beginning, the middle, and the ending of this relationship? Because you want to be able to look at, oh, this is how it started, this is how it was during it, and this is ultimately how it ended. How powerful is that? Because if you start a new relationship and it's starting similarly and you're working towards the middle that's pretty close to your old one, there's a good chance you can predict how it's going to end, right? So being aware, okay, if this is how it started, I'm already hitting this middle, then let me just not get to the end if I can avoid it. Or, wow, I had something start like this once before. I'm going to really be on my guard and not go full in super fast, because I really want to make sure it is going to be different. And if it keeps down that same path, then it's going to be a no for me. Okay, so once you get all of your answers and you're looking through all of this information, right? You got your red flags, you got your deal breakers. You're also looking at any of the patterns. How did it start? How did it go in the middle? How did it end? As you look through all this information that you now collected from prior information you collected, what stands out to you now? What is it that as you look at it, wow, what does this all say to me? What does this all point out for me? Because we want to be able to put that information to work. We don't want to just keep being mindful, oh, the stove is hot, this is how I get burnt, but I never make any changes. I never do anything with the information. It doesn't do us a whole lot of good to collect information, but not draw any conclusions. So what conclusions can you draw now that you have looked at all of this awesome information you just spent this time using? So again, if this is your first video in this series, I really encourage you to go back and just step through the exercises if you feel like you're in a space where you could do so. All this comes from I Can't Believe How Much This Hurts. You can find it on Amazon.com. And again, a link for the course will also be in the description. So I hope you're being really kind to yourself as you're working through this very hard process. Get more help or further help if you feel you need it. If you're struggling with eating, sleeping, functioning, like going to work or school, wherever you're at, if you feel like, okay, I'm sinking, then I encourage you to seek help from a professional in your area. So take good care, and I'll see you in the next one.